Welcome to the Inclusive Success Series, designed to encourage dialogue and share insights and learnings as to how we can all contribute to driving deeper levels of diversity, equity and inclusivity across our teams and organisations. Conversations with leaders and experts, exploring their careers, lessons learned, challenges they've faced and how they've overcome these, to empower us all to take action. My name's Helen Ledger, Senior Vice President of Marketing at Pragmatic Semiconductor, and I'm delighted to be joined today by Dame Julia Hoggett, Chief Executive Officer of the London Stock Exchange, and Janet Collyer, MBE and member of the UK Government's National Semiconductor Advisory Board and board member of MAC 42, Quantum Dice and the Aerospace Technology Institute. Thank you very much to you both for joining me today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you very much.
So to get us started, let's talk about what this means to you personally. So maybe to start with you, Julia, what does inclusive success mean to you and how has this shaped how you are today?
To me, it's basically an absolute necessity, is the best way of describing it. I think I've said this many times, but sometimes we treat diversity, equity and inclusion as something that is sort of an add-on or a side of the desk exercise. I have a completely different view. And in fact, I was giving a speech last night and I was asked a question like this in the Q&A. And I used a phrase I use a lot in the city, which is that we have in LGBT network contexts, this phrase of the day job and the gay job, which I hate. And I have a visceral dislike of it. And the reason is that actually thinking about inclusive leadership should be something that you do every single day as a leader. It's not something that's about rainbow lanyards and recruitment posters that make us feel good about ourselves. It's actually about how you think about leading people. Now, I have the privilege of leading the London Stock Exchange, and therefore my biggest job is to make sure I have the best possible team who understand the strategy and feel empowered to deliver their best in the work that they do. That's inclusive leadership. And that means understanding that not everybody looks the same, comes from the same context, has the same background, is battling the same issues, or will even come to the same issue with the same perspectives. You know, it's about giving everybody an equal opportunity to thrive so that we can generate the best outcomes we need to as an organisation. And I think too often we've treated it as a side of the desk exercise or as a separate exercise rather than something that's fundamentally integrated into the core act of running a business.
Mm-hmm. And essential. Yes, I completely agree. Yeah, and how about for you, Janet?
Yes, fascinating. Thank you very much, Julia. I think the way I see inclusivity is about getting the best team for the job. So the job is a big job, especially in technology and the pace of technology and the things that you have to do. And you need people in very many different sectors, all the way from marketing, someone who can write a press release on an iPhone in 4 minutes, that sort of thing, and an engineer who can solve a physical problem, again, in the same sort of time. So you need to have the best person for the job, regardless of how they look, how they speak, or where they live. And where this comes out, especially for me, is when you have either a great success or a great failure. And, you do a postmortem either way. Why did we win? And why did we lose and what can we learn from it? It's invaluable having different perspectives around the room. And that's where you see diversity get up and walk and run.
And can I pick up on that? Because I think that there's a theme in what Janet just said, which is resilience. To succeed and to do remarkable things is about resilience. It's about that relentless sense of powering on through each problem that you face and the confidence and the conviction that you can do so. You need people who can face their work with a confidence that we're all in this together, and if we all work together, we can get it done. Not that they're battling other challenges, because if you're asking people to show 8 levels of resilience in order to do the day job, we're just making it harder for ourselves in terms of giving ourselves the opportunities to succeed. So it is just integrated into everything that we should think about.
Yeah. And can you share an example of where you've had inclusion or maybe faced a challenge around that shaped your career or your perspective?
Yes, I think the most obvious one for me is actually my own coming out story in the city. And I sort of jokingly say I only do have one coming out story, so if people have heard it before, forgive me, but there only is one. This is how it happened. but essentially, I had come out at university and then gone into the city in the 90s when being gay was not a protected characteristic. And I had assumed that I had to go back into the closet and that there was no way I could ever be open on a big US investment banking trading floor. 2 years into my career, I had spinal surgery, and my MD came to visit me in hospital. Now, in my paranoia, I think I thought she was checking I was sick rather than that she was checking I was okay, which is what she was actually doing. And I just introduced her to my partner. Didn't really think anything of it. 3 days later, when they took the morphine drip out, I suddenly realized I had outed myself at the office. And at the end of that year, my MD came to see me to give me my end of year review. And that was in an era when in investment banking, you did 3 years as an analyst, 4 years as an associate, 7 years as a VP. And if you hadn't made MD by that point, you might want to go off and think about doing something else. That was sort of very structured way of the industry working. And they were going to promote me to associate a year early. And she said, well, we're putting you forward. Can't guarantee that the committee will break the rules and put you forward a year early. But if you do become an associate, next year, we will evaluate you not just on what you do for the team, but what you do for the wider organization. And then she said, have you thought about joining the LGBT Society? Now, I can be very dense on occasion, but not that dense. And that was a gold-plated invitation to come out. And so I then did, and I came out and organised a whole lot of things across the city. And I'm utterly convinced that I wouldn't be in the role I'm in today if that hadn't happened. Because the act of dissembling, kind of not telling the whole truth, not being honest about your personal circumstances is exhausting. And it takes away from the day job that is the thing that you have to commit your energy to. But the lesson it taught me was that a moment of my manager's time has had a lifetime's impact on me. And the inclusion is in those small acts of management and leadership as much as it's in those big performative acts, as it were. And that's why we need to give leaders of people that muscle memory and those tools to be able to engage with their people, as whole people, with everything that comes with their identity, what they bring to the office, the context they have. Because most people come to work wanting to give their best. But unless you know the context in which they're trying to give their best, it's harder to help them give their best. And this was a prime example of my manager doing that for me. And if there's one thing I've learned from that, it's I need to pay that privilege back and pay it forward to the next generation insofar as I can do.
Amazing. Yeah, one of my colleagues, Catherine Ramsdale, really channels this positive intent mentality, which takes effort in itself. And I know Janet and I have talked about this before. So yeah, that's incredibly powerful. And how about from your perspective, Janet?
The best example I have is how I ended up in semiconductors, which is the profession I joined. So at university, I preferred fluid mechanics, which is about liquid and gas and its movement. I just find that fascinating, how it gets from here to there, intact and so on. So I applied to aerospace, to oil and gas. And one of my last interviews was with an oil and gas company. And they said, we discussed you over breakfast and we cannot give you a job because you're a woman and women don't go in oil rigs, so we can't employ you. But he said, never fear. We've just had a semiconductor company join our group. We'll tell them to hire you. And that was it. I was in and out in 5 minutes. Anyway, I thought, well, I'll go to this interview. By then, I'd already had 3 or 4 job offers. I said, I'll go to this interview and see what happens. And I got there, and the manager, about 5 o'clock on a Friday evening, and he said, come in. Did you know? Guess what? We've been told to hire you. What do you think of that? So I mumbled something. He said, never mind, just sit down. Let's work it out. Now, because I was doing fluid, I didn't really know much about semiconductors. In fact, the first interview question was, is this switch on or off? And I didn't know, and I guessed. And he says, why do you say that? So I was outed. Yeah, you don't really know the answer, do you? I said, no, I don't. He said, never mind, we'll teach you. And so 4 days later came a letter offering me the job, and I had no doubt in accepting it. And I joined, and the first 2 years was like, baptism by fire, because I had to learn everything. But he made sure that I had all the people that I needed. It was only a team of about 10, 12 people at the time. It did grow later on. And he says, you're going to do several firsts. You're going to write your first paper for a magazine. You're going to do your first design on your own. There's this long list of things. So after 2 years, I thought, well, I've got this now, but maybe I should go back to college and do a master's so I can understand this stuff. And he said, well, if you really want to go, I said, yes, I do. I've got a bursary. I've got this, of that. All I need is the accommodation. So he said, well, how about you go to our headquarters in California for a year? I said, and do what? He said, I don't know. You'll have to work that out when you get there. And I still wasn't convinced. So he said, well, tell you what, if you don't like it, when you come back, we'll pay for your master's, all of it. So I did go to California. I didn't do the master's ever. So,
Got a real life master's.
but I got a real life master's because I got there and they just said, right, come, because there was so much work to do. It didn't matter. Oh, you can't program. Well, we'll get someone to show you how to write C programs. Oh, you need to go to the tester. Yeah, you can go down. Afraid it'll be 4 a.m. in the morning because that's when we have the space to teach you. Because by 7 a.m. we're doing business testing. So, it was just one of those quick fire things. I'll be exhausted every day. And that was an opportunity where I went from being an accidental semiconductor engineer to becoming a kind of more or less a jack of all trades, not necessarily best at everything at all, but I knew where to go and where the dragons were and where the angels were and so on. So after 3 years, I was just all set for a career, which lasted the full length of my career before I moved into board positions.
Wow. Amazing. So who would you say in particular, or how were you supported through that journey, Janet?
In so many ways, some of them I wasn't conscious of it because I wasn't that self-aware as a youngster. But various people would pop up. In fact, one person said, I'm going to mentor you. I said, oh, okay, thank you. So what does that mean? He says, well, I'll give you some feedback first, and then I'll ask you where you want to be in 3 to 5 years, and then we'll do this and that. So, and I think what it was is that I always asked for help. If I was stuck, I would ask for help, and I must have done it in a way that made them think it's worth a punt. There's so many times where someone has said, by the way, there's a job going down the corridor, or also there's a job going and don't really apply for it because it's not you, but there's another one that you can do. And the best piece of advice, when I changed a role, I got another job within the community, and when I was given it, a mentor, well, a friend, a person who I used to go on sales calls with, I was the technical person, he was the salesperson. He said, you'll do fine in sales, but the one thing you should do is don't be like me. And I said, well, you're successful. I've seen you win award after award. He says, yes, but that's because I'm me. You cannot behave like me because I've watched you. You're different. You have to find your own way of convincing people to buy stuff off you. And I guarantee you it'll be different to me. So, but I'm always here. I'll be here. If you get stuck, come and talk to me. If you want to chat, come and talk to me. Just don't copy me.
And some solid advice there. True, authentic self.
There is no part of my identity that's bound up with working in the city, perversely. I'm a sociologist who specialised in sub-Saharan East Africa, so that's still what I want to be when I grow up. And in a sense, you're someone who went into semiconductors who cared about fluid mechanics.
Yes.
And I think people who know they have to learn because they know that that's not the background they came from, but can always take a step back and think of themselves as a bit of an outsider and therefore observe the ecosystem differently and a bit dispassionately, actually then has the opportunity to add a different form of value to an organization because they're coming at it through a different lens than the person who's like, right, I want to learn how to make widgets. I've got a job making widgets. I'm just going to put my head down and make widgets. Because you need people who can think kind of laterally and with a different perspective. But you also need the sponsorship of the people who really know how to make widgets to know how to add the value. And this to me has always been that alchemic mix where true diversity and inclusion of context of background really fits. And it feels to me that your story is absolutely the epitome of why that works. Does that make sense?
It does, and I'm still enjoying it now. So it doesn't hurt.
No.
It's really great fun. Thank you. Yes, you were absolutely spot on there. Yeah.
Interesting point about mentors and sponsors as well. So let's definitely come on to that too. So what advice would you give to your younger self about feeling that you belong at work?
I think it's actually the advice I'd give is the thing actually I've learned almost from myself. It sounds very weird and self-serving, but I've learned to trust and understand what my motivation is. my motivation for getting up every day is to answer the critical exam questions that I think my job can serve. That's all. Every single part of my career and every choice I've made has been about answering a different exam question. And I've learned that they manifest kind of at the right time. I've learned that they're different. I've learned that I won't always know what they are as my career progresses. But it's trying to solve problems that really is the thing that gets me up every day and gets me moving. And I hope means that we can energize kind of all the people who work here to solve the same problems. But you've got to find your thing. For some people it will be earning a wage and being able to support their family. Some people it'll be answering a really technical, difficult problem. Some people it's about solving big systemic and ecosystem problems. But learn to trust it and learn and understand your motivation. And then particularly in jobs like this, we devote a huge amount of time to it. You really do need to be in an industry where you're passionate about it. So I think it is find your passion and follow it, because that's the thing that will get rewarded.
Yeah. Anything you'd like to add to that?
Sometimes if you see something and you think it's right, it probably is. And if you think it's wrong, it probably is. And there'll be course corrections along the way, but really don't let yourself get to a position where you're stuck and you don't have a way. There's always a way forward that suits you. You just have to be critical of yourself and inquire and find out. And the second thing I'd say is, and you touched on it earlier, Jordan, help. I had so much help in my career, and some of it was tough love, very tough love, and others was very supportive and best good ideas and different ideas. But always thank the people that did it. And it might be, especially when I was young, I didn't realize what they'd done until 10 years later. I think, oh, that's what they were saying. So go and tell them. If you can find them, tell them that. And the most important thing is pay it forward. So you need to get the talent in and so on. And that is a case of mentoring, regardless of who you are or what gender or anything. It's just need the talent, and there's lots of it in the UK.
Well, thank you for those reflections. I think they really help ground us in the why. So if we look to how we can lead more diverse and inclusive teams, what are some of the things that you've done, Julia, to help raise those voices that might otherwise not be heard across your team and organisation?
Often leadership teams are constructed in any organisation on a functional basis. But there is a risk that if you think everybody thinks alike and they've come from the same background, then we'll all vehemently agree to go in the wrong direction. And so I always seek to put in my leadership teams what I describe as pokey, prody people. And they're the people who will literally turn around and go, you see that elephant in the corner? Should we actually turn around and have a look at it? And possibly have a conversation about the fact it's actually there? No. And they're the people who care passionately, but they also are not afraid to say, actually, I don't see it that way. And they may or may not be right in each circumstance, but they will stimulate the conversation in a manner that really does shift the dial. But then you have to create an environment where they feel safe to do so, because often they're saying the thing that other people don't want to say. And sometimes they'll actually they're not going to unnerve people, but they might be taking people out of their comfort zone, and other people may have a reaction to that. And the phrase I use is, I don't need to be right, but I need us to get to the right answer. That it is a team effort. We are solving at the Exchange big problems and big questions about the shape of how our markets work for many years to come. It's not going to be one of those things where you just click your fingers and you find the solution. You've got to put all those perspectives and contexts on the table, and you've got to enable people to feel safe to do so. And I think as a leader, it's also about understanding your style. Now, I have one very deliberate style because it speeds things up, which is I will always read the papers for any meeting ahead of time. And I will often start with, okay, I've read the papers. This is what I think you have said. This is where I am right now as a consequence of this exam question. But it's then, please knock me down. And you need to create a culture where people feel safe to go, not Julia's just said she thinks this is the answer, but here are the reasons why she's wrong, or this is where she doesn't know something, or where she's misinterpreted something, or whatever. And then how do we go from this kind of first principles idea to where we ultimately get to? But you've got to be conscious that if you, as the head of the business, walk in and say, well, I think this, as the first thing you say, a whole lot of people might just go, you know, and we may have all willfully done the exact opposite of what I was advocating for. And so you need to be conscious of the shadow that you cast and how you operate. Not try not to be yourself, but make sure that you're thinking about, well, how's the way I behave being experienced by everybody around me? And what do I then need to do differently so that the thing I'm intending to try and achieve is the thing that they feel supported and empowered to do? Leadership is about two things. It's about humility and humanity. You know, it's not about, it's all about you. It's about how do you help all of your amazing people do what they do. And it's about realizing that in my case, there's somebody infinitely better than me at this job could be doing it. And therefore I have an utter duty to give my best to it, you know. And if you try and bring that into the room each time, I hope it has an impact on people feeling that they can add the best of them to that situation. But I think you develop your own theories of how you do these things, what levers you pull. Different people will be different because the thing they're trying to achieve is different or the dynamic's different. But it is a conscious leadership point of trying to think about the shadow that you cast as a leader of people and make sure that shadow is actually forming the shape that you want to form and not forming some ghostly shape that wasn't what you wanted to form, as it were.
Very powerful. And so that your personal leadership style, and then how do you percolate that? And you mentioned culture as part of that, your point there. How do you encourage that and bake that into the culture so you do, your shadow is the one that you want to cast, as you say?
One of the things that's most important to me is I'm exactly the same person in the office as I am at home. Now, you can feel very sorry for my partner as a consequence, but that is the case. Leadership, as you get more and more senior, is less about what you do, and it's more about what people say you do. Because they don't interact with you. They're not in the room in your direct meeting. They're seeing you as you walk across the floor, or they're seeing how you interact with other people. And therefore, you've got to recognize that there is a projection role so that the person that your direct reports see is still as much the same person that the people who report to your direct reports and report to them see as your directs do. And that is quite consciously hard work, you know, but really, really important. And it was one of those light bulb moments for me, suddenly became something that was utterly critical to how I lead and how I think about what I'm trying to do each day.
Well, as a marketeer, I can definitely say that there's nothing more powerful than being authentic for a brand, whether personal or business. Very powerful. So the evidence is clear. Companies with diversity across their teams that really embrace inclusion, they outperform their peers in terms of growth, levels of innovation, employee engagement. So given your role in particular, Julie, you must come across such a multitude of organisations. Can you share some of the traits that you see in companies that are embracing and succeeding? And then maybe some of the blind spots that you come across?
Yes, I mean, look, in my career, I've experienced a very broad range of different institutions, and I've seen a quite significant shift in the evolution of how we engage with diversity and inclusion. And one of the things I say quite repeatedly is I think it's actually been easier for me as an openly gay woman, notwithstanding the fact that I'm also a mother, than it is for an awful lot of my straight female colleagues. You know, I took 2 weeks off for the birth of my son and 2 weeks off for the birth of my daughter, and my career continued to do that between the ages they were 0 and 6. That's a privilege that most working women don't get. You know, my life looked more like my male colleagues than it did my female colleagues. And therefore, the journey and the issues that we've dealt with in inclusion have evolved quite markedly in my time in the industry. We haven't cracked those things as much as we should. One of the challenges we always have, particularly when we're trying to change things, and people have this debate about whether organizations have targets or whatever. And when I've been in organizations that have introduced targets around various forms of diversity, quite often it's that community who say, oh, I'm actually very uncomfortable about this. I don't want anyone saying I didn't get to the top on anything other than meritocracy. I mean, I don't want anybody saying I'm made CEO of the LSE because I'm an openly gay woman who's 5'1". You know, I get that. But the challenge is that meritocracy very often rewards the traits and characteristics of those who are already at the top. You know, it says, okay, we're going to evaluate people. We're going to evaluate them on what the people already leading the organization look like. So we can walk into a situation where we perpetuate systems that actually maintain the status quo and don't change it, while simultaneously saying that we want to change it. Yeah. That is one of the challenges of the system. It's a sort of cognitive dissonance that we all have as human beings. So the organizations I've seen make the most progress are the people who've really grappled with that question. How do we need to think differently about how we think about talent, about what leadership looks like, about what the people and the skill sets that we need around the table are, rather than saying we're just going to keep doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result? Because there's an awful lot of evidence that that doesn't produce a different result. And I was just thinking that your career is a prime example of that, which is somebody who cared about a completely different bit of engineering, turning into someone who worked in semiconductors, and the organization going, actually, your talent is what we've spotted, and you're not the cookie cutter example of what we should have in this situation, but we're going to sponsor you to have the skill set to get into it, and look at what you've done. You know, it's a prime example of exactly the approach that organizations should take. But achieving that takes a breadth and a deliberate set of actions. You know, it actually means scrolling back all the way through the string of every recruitment process. What universities do you go to? How do you describe your job descriptions? What's your initial sift process? Have you given hiring managers the mandate to be bold and brave? Because if they can spot a talent, then they're going to have the resources to really support that talent to make a difference. You know, it's all of that kind of stuff. And if it becomes incredibly cookie cutter and incredibly generic, then that human piece of it can get lost. And so the firms I've seen make the most progress are the ones who know that's the hard work they need to do, and they really engage with doing it, and they think quite carefully and deliberatively about the spaces for that sponsorship and mentorship to happen.
Yeah, excellent. And Janet, what practices have helped you lead inclusivity, and particularly in high pressure, fast paced environments?
The thing I found with semiconductors is that things were changing so fast. Every 2 years, it was a different shiny new button. And that's why I was at a conference yesterday, aerospace, and they said that if aerospace had moved at the same pace as semiconductors, you would have been able to go from London to Sydney, and the fuel cell would be the size of a thimble. You know, and that gives you an example of just how fast the industry is moving. So it gets a stage that the thing that matters is getting to the finish line first. You may not have the best solution, but you need cover. And so as you build your team, have a plan A, plan B, plan C, so that you're ready, you're not scrambling for a solution, and you keep shuffling your teams around. And it has the effect of, it's not so much what you do as how you do it. So that you're a bit like chess pieces on the board, where you get moved around depending on what is needed, and it's nothing personal. It's just, this is what we need to do, but don't run away. We'll come back to you. Just keep going. And the second thing I found is just asking questions. That's always a good place to start, because there's one example where I was speaking to a very accomplished vice president. And he said, I've got something to tell you. It was usually about women, because I'd be one of the few women in the room. And he'd say, I've just done something you'll be proud of. I've changed a meeting that I used to have with the team from 5 o'clock to lunchtime, because one of the ladies always has to run off to do something to collect her children, I guess. And so I made it lunchtime. I said, did she tell you that? He said, no, I just worked it out. So I said, well, why don't you ask her? And it turned out it was nothing to do with children. It was a quiz night or something that she... So he'd had this perception that, I've spotted it. So he had all the right intentions, but didn't ask why. And another example is a university in the southwest of England, where they were trying to get more engineers applying, because engineering, especially electronic engineering, is suffering. So the engineers, mechanical engineers, aeronautical engineers, they're flooded with applications. Electronics, not so much. so the pipeline isn't working. So this Department of Engineering thought, we'll change the name from engineering to design engineering. It was the cost of a sign on their building, and the rest of it was mail merge. So very cheap. And that year, they had a 30% increase in applications from women, very talented women. So they came in and they said, lovely to have you. Why? Well, I did design technology at GCSE. And design technology is everything from textile printing and designing a clock to heavy engineering and designing a building like this. It's all design technology. And so just that extra 2 words made all the difference. And so the university said, okay, now our problem is how do we hang on to them? So, you celebrate for 3 minutes. We got them. Now, hang on to them. So you're forever climbing a hill and looking at the next hill that's coming along. And all of that's down to just having a mind that's inquisitive and a process that supports and does not demonize the inquisitive people.
But the thing about your 2 examples there is they're about human beings and they're about humanity. Putting the word design there is about understanding and putting yourself into the shoes of those students who might be applying and going, what is the thing that's going to mean something to them? Are we talking at them in our language, or are we talking to them in their language? And then having a team where you say, actually, I understand that you're under pressure now, the release valve is over here, we're an organic whole, but I'm going to look after you in your understanding of how you're fitting in and talk to you through that lens, rather than just go away and I'll come back to you later. This is the point. Managing incredibly talented human beings to do stuff is just an act of managing human beings. And every person wants to feel respected, they want to feel seen, they want to feel understood, and they come at the world from their context. And as much as we can do to make our context relevant to their context, the more likely you're going to get that overlap. And your 2 stories absolutely illustrate that.
Yeah. That really echoes the point you were making about assumptions as well, having a conversation and understanding what those needs are. So what steps have you taken to address underrepresentation and making sure this is something that's really part of the business, ingrained? And you mentioned, for instance, some of the recruitment examples there, but ingrained across all facets of the organisation and levels of leadership.
We think about it through a range of different lenses, both at the London Stock Exchange Group and at the London Stock Exchange. And I've talked about recruitment, so let me talk about a different angle of it, which is we have this phrase, we have a balcony, we will use it. But we think it's really important as the convener of the ecosystem in the city to stand and visibly stand for the things that we think matter. Whether that's inclusion and actually using our balcony to celebrate those things. One of the things that is a personal passion project of mine is trying to address the inequity of access to capital that companies led by women, and particularly companies led by minority ethnic founders, face. And the numbers are horrendous. In sort of less than 2 pence in every pound of venture capital is going into female-led businesses, and it's less than 1 pence for minority ethnic-led businesses. That's dreadful. Shouldn't be the case. That isn't representative of the distribution of talent. It's representative of how certain people distribute money. And so how we can create spaces for female founders, for example, or people from minority ethnic backgrounds to feel that this is their house too. The things that we're seeking to do to convene capital, and our job is to create a level playing field where everybody can transact on the same basis. We should apply that across the piece. So it isn't just about what you do in recruitment. It's actually what you think about your purpose and how you think about how you're going to advocate for your purpose as well. And the things that we can therefore do as initiatives, or just viewing it as part of our job, that acts to do what we can to be more inclusive as well. So we treat it through numerous different lenses as a consequence.
Excellent. So really powerful reminder of what action we need to take, and structures and frameworks to put in place to support that. So let's explore some of the structural challenges that you mentioned, Julia, and also inclusion and supporting the talent pipeline, as you mentioned, Janet, which is incredibly important and something I know you feel very passionately about. So can you share a little around a challenge you've faced to inclusion and representation and methods of navigating that?
I think the challenge that structurally I've seen across my career has been this issue of people like this fit this role. you know. And the more technical your industry, the more that can become the issue. And I think one of the things that we have faced as a lot of industries is the amount of time we spend training people has changed. There is much more of an assumption that you come out of university with more of the training to do the job. When I started my career, I mean, I started at JP Morgan. I went because it had the longest training program on the street, and I was a sociologist. I hadn't come out of the womb wanting to be an investment banker. And I knew I needed to go somewhere that would train me. And in an era where people stayed in the same place for a long time, companies committed a lot of energy and effort to doing so. And that's how I got basically the first year of an MBA in 3 months of working incredibly hard, and it was the foundation of my career. We now ask young people to pick much earlier to take on more of that technical learning in university without them actually having tried it, tested it, or seen it. And I think that also makes it harder for that apprenticeship journey and the learning journey, and for the idea that actually in investment banking you could have poets and geographers and linguists as much as you can have people who've got masters in finance. And in the same way, that in more technical skills as well. And it is a conundrum, and it's a conundrum society faces, because we need a society that's got the right mix of polyglots and technical experts. And now that we have AI doing half the screening, when there are things the kids need to learn now about how to even get in front of a human being in a company that I'm not certain I could navigate, because I don't think I look like the archetype is supposed to. And so I think there are still some real challenges for how we've engaged with what we want to achieve, really making sure that the tools we're using today achieve it, rather than run the risk that we double down on how it's always been. I think that's the challenge that we're facing at the moment. And I think it is always going to come to me about coming back to encouraging hiring managers to hire a broad range of people, but then the institutions have to give them the tools to then support that breadth of experience to have the right learning and knowledge to be able to deliver the job. It's a really tough nut to crack. And the more we try and make decisions faster and faster, and the more people change jobs multiple times, the harder it is. But I think that's at the heart of the next stage of unlocking inclusion in most industries.
I think that's a really important point that you mentioned as well about people making decisions around university choices or earlier in their studies, and actually raising the profile of the fantastic careers and opportunities there are, not just in finance and technology, but beyond as well. So, Jenna, what are your thoughts around what efforts we can all make to help raise the profile of these careers and opportunities earlier?
I think one thing about technology, and now it's happening really fast, a leap in technology creates a gap in skills as night follows day. And that isn't a surprise when you think about it. Yeah, of course it would. So prepare for it. There's a way of, once you've decided that, okay, I'm going to anticipate this skills gap and try and do something about it. So you have to go and help and work out how you can help. So go out younger and younger, catch them, offer them opportunities, offer them 3-day workshops. They'll turn up because they'll get plenty of food, get plenty of fun and the outdoor sports. It's just time. If everyone does something, you'll get a workforce that have choice. Okay, you're giving them choice. You may give them all this and then they go and work for someone else. But usually it balances out in the end. So just take ownership for the success. Don't expect the government to do it for you. Don't expect a particular department in your company to do it. You all need to say, how are we going to increase the pipeline so we can select from them? So I think in 10 years' time, it'll be a very different dynamic between different stakeholders.
Yeah.
But it takes time. So start now, and maybe in 5 to 10 years' time, we'll start to see reap big benefits from that.
Yeah. Important point. I think you really do reap what you sow with these things, and it's a responsibility for business also to showcase. We recently hosted 3 different primary schools for National Manufacturing Day up at our fab in Pragmatic Park in just outside Durham, and the children were delighted, and we've had numerous requests from other schools as well. So I think that's definitely something that, not a one-off, but being able to continue that, striking a balance, but showcasing these opportunities.
But can I pick up on that? Because I think this is one of the things that we don't always do as well as we could do in the UK. We don't actually talk about business and what they do in a way that's accessible to kids in primary schools or in secondary schools or even their parents. Business is this big bad thing of, in our case, basis points, big cover ratios and investment banking league tables. It's not what you're doing in Pragmatic Park, taking over an old ceramics factory and turning it into the next generation of amazing semiconductors. And we need to find a way of getting light in to each one of the companies up and down the country that does these amazing things, so that that person can go, I've got a sense of what that is in my head, and I can see how I would be fulfilling my purpose if I went to do that. And at the moment, they're all black boxes to most people because we don't talk about them and celebrate businesses and business models and the things that they do in a way that has that accessibility. And that's one of my passion projects, actually, and one of the things we try and do at the Exchange, which is when we have companies who IPO, we tell their story. We've done it with Dave and talking about the business at Pragmatic, but it's that thing. These are all human stories that resonate at a deeply human level, and that gives us the opportunity to make a difference. And that's how we attract the talent in, because it feels human to them.
Let's turn to the action that we can take today. So if you were sitting down with an individual or a group at the beginning of their leadership journey, or possibly someone who recognises that they don't have such a lens on diversity, equity and inclusion as to how they operate, what advice and counsel would you share?
The first is, it is a core part of doing the job. Don't shy away from it and be worried. And that actually it is about understanding human beings, so ask. One thing I talk about a lot is there's a thing called the Timpson test. And Timpsons are famous, the shoe and the key cutters. They hire a lot of people who've actually had a prison journey at some point in their lives. And the Timpson test is really simple. If you can write down everybody who works for you, but then across this side, do they have a partner? Do they have kids? Do they have pets? What team do they support? Have they got caring responsibilities? What are they passionate about? Are there other things in their life that they're battling? How far across that page could you get? We have a bit of a British reticence of, well, it's rude to ask. And I actually think you cannot know how to be inclusive of someone unless you understand their context. And you can't assume it is uninclusive, if that's the right word, to not ask and to assume that someone else's life experience is the same as yours. Curiosity is actually kindness in this regard. And quite often managers feel that that's the thing they can't ask rather than the thing that they should ask. So to me, and it's not prying, it's just actually saying, how do I understand the same things about you that I understand about the other people who look more like me, and therefore I can project into what they might be thinking, but I may not be able to project into what you might be thinking or what you might be experiencing. And it's giving people that permission. I think that's the biggest thing I'd say.
Yeah. One thing that was mentioned, sponsors and mentors. Maybe Janet, what difference do you see between these and the importance of those for individuals and teams?
So generally it's about just how much time they spend with you. So a sponsor is someone who might only see you for 2 minutes doing something and then they move on. But you've done enough in that time. I say 2 minutes just to exaggerate. It could be an hour. But you've done enough in that time that they remember something about you. And that's the thing. They'll remember, they may not remember what you said, but they will remember how you made them feel. So that's a sponsor, someone they'll think about you going forward. That's a sponsor. A mentor is someone who spends a bit more time with you and asks a lot more questions. And my favorite is, where do you want to be in 3, 5, and 10 years' time? So a mentor is one who helps you think about how you're going to get what you want. I mean, I've had a sponsor who I didn't really know well, but he came and gave me feedback when I'd spoken at an event, and it was quite brutal. And I was so grateful for it. And we haven't spoken again since. There's the odd, how are you doing? We must have the coffee. And now that's my action from today. I must go and get that coffee done.
Excellent. Some super insights there. So to end on a high, and looking ahead to the future, what gives you hope?
The fact that so many firms are looking at tools and things that they can use. And the fact that actually the solution is what it has always been, which is humanity.
Janet, any further thoughts from you?
I'm so thrilled with what's happening now. There's so much changing. And when things are changing, that's when it's almost like everything's thrown up into the air and you can actually make a difference. So, I'd encourage anyone who's listened to this, you personally can make a difference.
Excellent. Well, thank you both so very much for sharing your insights, generosity, and your journeys and experiences. I think there's some super insights there. And fundamentally, it's all about people and being picky and pokey and curious and not making assumptions and doing the hard work, taking the effort across all levels of the organisation to really help continue the conversation and drive action and change. So thank you both very much.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.